Hi guys, it's me, ChazzaHD, and welcome to another Grand Prix in 2024 as we come towards the end of the 2024 season. It is, I think, the 20th or 21st race weekend of the season. Quite incredible that we've still got a few races to go, despite there obviously being so many races so far. But here we are in Sao Paulo, Brazil for the Sao Paulo Grand Prix weekend. And it's going to be a very decisive weekend. Of course, this is the final part of a triple header. We've had, obviously, Mexico last weekend, which was controversial to say the least. The US Grand Prix the week before that was controversial. We've had some good racing in these last couple of weeks, but this Grand Prix really is going to, maybe not in terms of the Constructors' Championship, but I think definitely with the Drivers' Championship, this Grand Prix is really going to show us what is going to happen, I think, in the end. Of course, we've already had a sprint race. I'll get into what the results of that were in a moment. But with the race tomorrow being, by the looks of it, it looks like it's going to be a wet race, and potentially it could be wet for the entire race. And of course, we know just how incredibly hard it is to race at this circuit in the wet. This could be the Grand Prix that makes or breaks either Verstappen or Norris's season in terms of winning the championship. I can tell you that Lando Norris won the sprint race, which finished about, what was it, an hour and a half ago, I think it finished. Lando Norris ended up winning from Oscar Piastri in second. Max Verstappen took third, but he is under investigation for a possible virtual safety car infringement. So we'll have to see whether his position ends up dropping. No news as of yet as to whether Max Verstappen has received a penalty. And then it was Leclerc 4th, Sainz 5th, Russell 6th, Gasly 7th. What a result for him. And what form the Frenchman is in. And then Sergio Perez ended up finishing in P8. But yeah, we'll see what happens with possible penalty for Max. Maybe he'll drop a position or two, which will give an extra couple points for Lando. But I'll get into what the championship standings are, coming out of that sprint race in a moment. But yeah, the gap between Verstappen and Norris is 45 points. Lando needs to outscore Verstappen this weekend by another, he needs to take another 10 points out of him, really, to have a realistically good chance of winning the championship by the end of the season. So, absolutely crucial, this qualifying session today. He must make sure that he gets what he really should have got yesterday for the sprint race, which is pole position. In sprint qualifying yesterday, McLaren were very quick, and I'm expecting them to be very quick here in the proper qualifying session. For qualifying today, by the way, we could get some rain. The rain, there is a decent chance of rain for this session, but it should be mostly dry. So I think, if we do get rain, it will probably be the odd shower that lasts maybe a few minutes. But again, most of the session should be dry. And in terms of when that rain comes, if it does come, who knows when it'll be. If it's in Q3, we might have a situation like we did last year, or the year before, where it comes towards the end of the session and ends up making for a premature end to qualifying. So we'll have to see if that rain does come when it does arrive. But this is a very, very important qualifying session, is the point I'm trying to make. Lando Norris must get pole position and take advantage of McLaren having the quickest car this weekend. Max Verstappen, he is going to be taking a 5-place grid penalty for the race tomorrow, Not because of anything that happened in Mexico, but because Red Bull had to put a new ICE in his power unit. So, yeah, Max will be starting realistically around 8th, ninth, maybe 10th on the grid for tomorrow. So Max desperately needs to qualify, say, third, I think is really what he needs to aim for in this session today to get a decent enough starting position for tomorrow so that he can't be, too far back on the grid for what might be a very challenging race. But yeah, this is a very important session. And for Lando Norris, with Max Verstappen probably going to be starting in the back end of the top 10 tomorrow, again, very important he gets pole to capitalise on Max being that far back. Because given the pace of the McLaren, even I think in wet conditions, Lando Norris must win this Grand Prix. Absolutely must win this Grand Prix, especially if Max is going to finish third or lower. Because, like I said, he needs to take 10 points or more out of Max in this Grand Prix weekend. So, we will see what happens regarding qualifying later on. Should be a good session. Obviously, we've already had a sprint qualifying session and a sprint race, so we're we're not even we're already spoiled as to what the performance level is between, through the grid and, from top to bottom. We know pretty much what the pecking order is this weekend, which is a shame because obviously we love to, find that out when we actually get to qualifying rather than finding that out on a Friday. But, that's the way it is, obviously, with the sprint race having happened. But I hope you guys are doing well. Hope you are doing well after the Mexico Grand Prix, obviously, of last weekend. And no matter what time zone you're in, what part of the world you're from, I hope you're all having as best a time as possible. And I hope you'll join me today in watching along and enjoying qualifying from Brazil, which gets underway, as you can see, in about an hour and 20 minutes from now. And as usual, we will go through the usual stuff that we do in the build-up to qualifying. And that is the data from the weekend so far. And what we're going to be paying attention to is the data from sprint qualifying, which really does show us what the pecking order is and, who is quick, who isn't. And also with the sector time data that we'll get into, that shows us very importantly where certain teams are quick and where certain teams are very much lacking in performance. But before I get on to that, as usual, there is a poll running in the live chat. Let me know in that poll, who do you think will take pole position for the Sao Paulo Grand Prix? Will it be Max Verstappen? Even though Max can't start on pole, of course he can finish first in qualifying. Do you think that'll happen? Or do you think Lando Norris will take pole? Will Charles Leclerc take pole? Or will Oscar Piastri take pole? Remember, Piastri did take pole for the sprint race. So we have to keep our eyes out for both McLaren drivers today. So yeah, you can vote in that poll, and that poll obviously will keep running until the beginning of Q3. I am just seeing in the chat, though, good to see some of you in already. Max Verstappen 5-second penalty has been confirmed. Therefore, Max Verstappen, I believe, will have been dropped to fourth place. Yes, he has been. Now, unfortunately, guys, because that decision has come after I've started the stream, I wasn't able, obviously, to update the championship standings accordingly. Because obviously Max now loses a point. Ferrari and Leclerc gain a point from that penalty. And the penalty, by the way, is for Max, I think, exceeding the delta under the virtual safety car, I believe. let me just see quickly. Just looking at the actual FIA document. He was half a second, it says, below the VSC, or below the minimum time at the end of the VSC. So, yeah, just a little error there from Max. So, let's get on to what the championship standings are from the sprint race. Now Max Verstappen, now he's been given a penalty. It's now 367 points for Max. Lando, of course, stays on 323. So the gap between Max Verstappen and Lando Norris is now 44 points. Leclerc is now on to 297 points. You can see there is no changes in the championship order from the sprint race. It's all the same. The only slight differences is that we have is that I think George Russell slightly closer to his teammate. Russell, you would imagine, would finish ahead of Lewis Hamilton in the championship before the end of the season. But yeah, no real major changes there. And then on the constructors' side, for Red Bull, obviously now they've lost a point, and Ferrari have gained a point. So Ferrari will be on 547 points. Red Bull will be on 518, meaning that McLaren are now 34 points clear of Ferrari. And Red Bull are now, 63 points, I think, behind McLaren. And at this point, I'd say Red Bull, given their form, and obviously they've only got one driver really scoring points for them in Max. Red Bull, I think, are out of the Constructors' Championship battle. And unless Ferrari have a poor end to the season, which I don't see happening, I think Red Bull are going to finish in third place. So, yeah, a horrible season for Red Bull. But it's all their fault. They have really contributed massively to them, dropping from what was a comfortable lead in the Constructors to third place. And they're probably going to end the season only 100 points or so clear of Mercedes, who, like 150 points behind, but probably will gain a few more points on Red Bull. So, yeah, it's just, again, indicative of just how poor Red Bull have been at scoring points in the second half or for most of the season, because, again, they've only got one driver really to rely on. So those are how the championship standings are affected. Again, only slightly in terms of points, but positions-wise, nothing massive. At the bottom there of the constructors, though, you can see now Alpine are now 1 point behind Williams because Pierre Gasly vitally scored 2 points in the sprint race. Brilliant drive from Gasly. Again, unbelievable form he's in. And I'd have to say at the moment, Gasly is probably one of the top few performers in Formula One right now. If you look at this triple header, he's been right up there. I think probably one of the top 5 performers. He's been absolutely fantastic in an Alpine car, but still, has its issues. And Alpine, maybe. I mean, I know their car improved with an upgrade they brought a couple of weeks ago, but they might be able to take 8th of the championship. It's going to be close, though, between them and Williams. But let's get on to the results of sprint qualifying yesterday, because obviously we're looking ahead to qualifying, which is coming up obviously in about an hour and 15 minutes from now. And sprint qualifying took place in the dry, and again, this qualifying session coming up will probably take place mostly in the dry. And it gave us, again, a clear indication as to what the pecking order is. McLaren in dry conditions, whether it's qualifying or the race, McLaren have got the best car. There is no doubt about that whatsoever. The only reason Max Verstappen ended up close in the sprint race was because Oscar Piastri, who was leading the sprint for quite a while, was deliberately backing off to keep Lando close to him, because obviously they were going to eventually do the swap, which they did do. So McLaren, like I said, they have got the best car here this weekend, no doubt about it. And in wet conditions, obviously, the pecking order is not going to be exactly the same, but you would expect McLaren in the wet also to be the quickest team. So, yeah, McLaren, they're the team to beat, no doubt about that this weekend. In terms of this qualifying session coming up, though, in terms of who ends up on pole position, that is up for grabs because even though Lando Norris, he bemoaned the mistakes he made on his final lap in SQ3 yesterday, Piastri has still been very close on lap time to Norris. So it's not like Lando, if he is quicker, is miles quicker like he was, say, a couple weeks ago at Kota or in Singapore. They are close on performance this weekend. No doubt about that. So, yeah, it's definitely up for grabs who gets pole. And Oscar Piastri is going to go for pole. He's not going to, he's not going to back off or anything. He is going to absolutely go for it because, as we've seen this season, you can't rely necessarily on Lando always being there at the top. Lando might make a mistake. Who knows? And then after that, you have Leclerc in third, Verstappen fourth, and Carlos Sainz in P5. Now, in the sprint race, Red Bull were quicker than Ferrari. Ferrari's race pace, actually, for the first time in a while, doesn't look very good. But again, that's in the dry. If it is raining tomorrow, it could be a lot better. But in terms of who the second fastest team is in qualifying trim, I think you would have to lean towards Ferrari, but it is very close. Very, very close between Ferrari and Red Bull. So, if you were to say Ferrari and Red Bull are basically on the same pace, I wouldn't really argue against that. It's very close to call between those two teams. But again, I would probably lean slightly towards Ferrari just because as of late, they've had a faster car than Red Bull. And then after that, Mercedes, couple tenths of a second behind that little fight. And Mercedes are, I wouldn't say necessarily closer to the midfield this weekend than they are to, let's say, the front. But they are definitely the fourth fastest team at best. And I am surprised that they haven't shown any improvement in speed this weekend. I was expecting them to be closer here than they were in Mexico and be with Russell. I thought they would be right in that fight there. You can see with, Leclerc, Verstappen and Sainz. Say Russell smack bang in the middle. But no, Russell and Mercedes clearly slower. Which is very sad because, again, I thought this Grand Prix, especially with it probably raining tomorrow, I thought this was a good chance for Mercedes to possibly fight for a podium or maybe even contend for victory. But so far from what we're seeing, they don't really appear to have much pace, which is quite disappointing. Their race pace, what am I on about? Their race pace in the sprint was better than what we saw them, what we saw from their pace in qualifying, but still wasn't very good. They were still quite far behind Ferrari. So yeah, Mercedes not in great shape really at all. Alpine with Pierre Gasly, 7th place. What a performance by Gasly. Now, Alpine, through qualifying up until the final part of sprint qualifying, Alpine looked very close on performance with Haas, who ended up getting a pretty disappointing result compared to, again, what their pace was looking like through the first couple parts of the sprint qualifying session. Pierre Gasly, though, full credit to him, he delivered when it mattered at the end of sprint qualifying, and that's why he ended up taking 7th, which is ultimately why he finished 7th in the sprint race. But Haas are definitely quicker than what they showed at the end of sprint qualifying. Oliver Behrman, you can see, didn't do a lap time in the final part of sprint qualifying at the end. But if you go look at the best lap times that every team did in sprint qualifying, again, Alpine and Haas were on the same pace, with Haas actually quicker, I think, slightly than Alpine. So in terms of who is best of the rest, it's between Alpine and Haas, but it's very, very close. So you can't exactly say it's definitely one team over the other. So we will see who ends up, say, at the front of the midfield pack. Liam Lawson did a fantastic job in sprint qualifying to qualify 8th, but again, I don't think Racing Bulls are as quick as that position, which just shows you how great of a result that was for Lawson. Getting a result that wasn't really on the cards, I don't think, for them going into sprint qualifying, but they got it nonetheless. Alex Albon, great performance by him to get into SQ3. He's had a couple good performances in this last week or so. Obviously got into Q3 in Mexico before his first lap crash. But yeah, in terms of the midfield, again, Alpine and Haas, I would say 5th and 6th. But again, who is 5th and who is 6th? Too close to call. And then after that, you'd probably say Racing Bulls 7th best. And then 8th, Williams, and then 9th. The 9th best team, surprisingly, you'd have to say Sauber. Because as we move on to the rest of the order, you can see Lewis Hamilton end up in P11. Hamilton was absolutely terrible in the sprint race and has been pretty bad all weekend. So don't be expecting really anything from him, unfortunately, this weekend. Hulkenberg 12th. Didn't really deliver, did Hulkenberg, in sprint qualifying, and also broke down in the sprint race. Hopefully he will be fine to compete in qualifying. He should be. Sergio Perez 13th. Pathetic effort from him. 0.8 of a second slower than Max around a track this short is just, again, it is absolutely pathetic. Franco Colapinto 14th. He'll be disappointed, Franco, with that. I think Franco probably could have done a couple positions better than that. 15th, Valtteri Bottas. Good job by him. But yes, Sauber, quicker than Aston Martin. Look how far Aston Martin were and are off the pace. 2 seconds off pole, when this time last year they finished on the podium here in Brazil and were, I think it was about half a second a lap off the pace of the front runners. Now it's 2 seconds. And in the sprint race, Fernando Alonso finished, I think, was it almost 1 minute behind Norris, who won. And the sprint race, by the way, was only 24 laps. So, you know, that's like, what, 2.5 seconds a lap of lap time lost. This has to be the worst drop-off in performance over the course of a season we've seen from Aston Martin this year in Formula One history. I mean, last year, of course, we saw a big drop-off of performance with them, but they were still scoring points on a semi-regular basis. And obviously, towards the end of last season, Aston Martin returned to being, decently quick. But, yeah, start of this season, they were what? 4th, 5th fastest team. And now look at them. The slowest on the grid. And a big reason why they're so slow this weekend is because Aston Martin have gone back to the Japan spec. Yes, you heard me right. They have gone back to the spec of car they used back at the Japanese Grand Prix. The Japanese Grand Prix was 7 months ago. That's pretty much an entire season's worth of development that they have thrown away, and they've just gone back basically to the basic car. I don't have any words really to describe anymore, this situation. I mean, Mercedes also have issues with correlation from the wind tunnel. Aston Martin also use the same wind tunnel that Mercedes use. So clearly that particular wind tunnel, there is massive problems with it in terms of, correlating to real life. But no matter what Adrian Newey does in the future, if this continues, again, it will not matter at all. So there's no point taking Aston Martin seriously until we know that they have fixed their correlation issues from the wind tunnel to the track. Because, even if they start the season with best car, if we know they're going to lose like a second or so in lap time over the course of the season, again, it won't matter. So, yeah, Aston Martin absolutely in the mud, I think we can say safely. Esteban Ocon, 17th. I do wonder with Ocon, because the last couple races, his teammate Gasly's been flying and he's been diabolical. I do wonder whether Gasly is the only one who's been given the upgrades in that Alpine. Wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. Obviously, Ocon is leaving the team for, is it Haas next season? So, again, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case, but that is also hurting Alpine's chances of scoring more points if they are doing that. But maybe, at this point, maybe they just don't care. I'm not quite sure. But I wouldn't be surprised if that's why Ocon is just so slow. And then Yuki Tsunoda 18th, horrible performance by him. Lance Stroll 19th, again, Aston Martin awful. And then Zhou Guanyu 20th. To be fair to Zhou, he didn't manage to get round in time to do a final lap in SQ1, but let's be honest, he was going to end up in 20th anyway because he is absolutely terrible. Talking of Sauber, by the way, it looks as though, according to Brazilian media, it looks as though the second seat at Sauber has been secured, and it appears it has been secured by Gabriel Bortoleto, a very good Formula 2 driver. He's in the McLaren driver academy. And yeah, he's a very good driver. As good, I think, as Colapinto. Could maybe even be better. And I think Sauber have made a good decision there. Even though, yeah, Colapinto's on the market. And if they had gone with him, that would have been, a great decision also. From what I've seen of Bortoleto, I don't think Sauber have made, a bad decision. Obviously, we'll have to see how Bortoleto performs in Formula 1. But I wouldn't be surprised if Bortoleto comes in and, is doing well next season. Hopefully, though, if he is in that car, the Sauber is a lot better next season, because at the minute, the Sauber is absolutely pathetic. It's nowhere near where it should be. So, again, ultimately, we'll see how he performs next season. But in terms of the pecking order from sprint qualifying and in terms of what the pecking order should be for this session, again, in the dry, McLaren quickest, Red Bull and Ferrari second and third. Again, you can decide who you think is quicker. Mercedes fourth, Alpine and Haas fifth and sixth. Again, you can decide who's quicker. And then Racing Bull seventh, Williams eighth, Sauber ninth, Aston Martin 10th. That is pretty clearly what the pecking order is here in Brazil. But let's get on to the sector time data, just to see why certain teams are quick and why certain teams are shit slow. Now, the first sector, I mean, you've got, I'd say, a medium to high speed turn 1, 2, which is important. But really, the first sector is about high speed performance, or straight line speed, I would say. But it is surprising to see McLaren so good in the first sector, because we know obviously their car is not one of the quicker cars in a straight line. But I think that combination of corners of turn 1, 2 and 3, I think they're just so good through there. That's why they are the quickest in the first sector. So it just shows that, yeah, that car is just unbelievably good in the medium to high speed corners, which we've seen, to be fair, all season long. Red Bull, half a tenth behind. The pace from Red Bull there is absolutely fine. Mercedes losing nearly 2/10 of a second to McLaren is just simply not good enough, but that's what we're seeing at the moment from Mercedes. They're just not on the same level at all as McLaren. Ferrari, though, without doubt, are the biggest surprise. They should be at least a tenth of a second quicker, if not a tenth and a half quicker, through this part of the lap. To lose 2/10 of a second to McLaren in the first sector is, again, nowhere near good enough. So Ferrari can definitely improve in this part of the lap. Alpine, very impressive for them to be fifth quickest in the first sector. Williams, good first sector. Aston Martin, not too bad. Would have expected more from Haas. Would have expected probably a tenth and a half more on lap time. So maybe they can find that. Racing Bulls, not very good. And then Sauber at the back, which is to be expected. But yeah, very impressed by McLaren's speed in the first sector. And then the middle sector just solidifies the very good pace they have through really all of the corners here at Interlagos. And the middle sector here really does show who does have, the best grip here at this track. And McLaren, no surprise, the best when it comes to that, nearly a tenth and a half quicker than Ferrari. I don't think Ferrari really could be any better through this part of the lap. And we have to remember Ferrari just over a tenth quicker than Red Bull. So, yeah, I think Ferrari are doing absolutely fine. Red Bull, though, being a quarter of a second off is, quarter of a second off McLaren. That is really the difference between those two teams around this track this weekend. It is all about the middle sector. If Red Bull could find a bit more pace in the middle sector, Red Bull could, on performance, be competitive with McLaren. But this is the part of the lap that prevents that. A very good pace, though, from Haas. Again, proving that they have, at the minute, just such a good car. And also, it is further evidence that, obviously, they brought an upgrade a couple of weeks ago and have been the best midfield team since then. We saw, obviously, in Mexico, they were very, very quick, were Haas. And again, this is just further evidence of that. So, yeah, good to see. And obviously, Oliver Behrman there in the Haas. If you're wondering why is Oliver Behrman in the car, it's because Kevin Magnussen, sadly, has been struck down with illness. So, Behrman will be in the car for the rest of the weekend. Of course, Behrman will be in the car permanently next season. George Russell, fifth in the Mercedes, and this part of the lap perfectly showcases why Mercedes have gone a bit more back to where they were at the start of the season, where they were, comfortably far off the pace. Nearly 3.5 tenths of a second slower than McLaren in a sector of 35 seconds, which again is all about cornering performance. That's where Mercedes, that's what separates them, between them and McLaren. They just don't have the downforce, whether it's in the slow speed corners, high speed corners. They just do not have the same level of downforce that McLaren do. And obviously, same power unit, so they don't, they're not able to have an advantage in that way over McLaren. So, yeah, that's just the state of play for Mercedes, and that's probably going to be the way it is until the end of the season, because obviously we're, not that far away from the end of the season, and Mercedes at this point really should just focus on next year's car, building fundamentally from the outset a better car than what they had at the start of this year, and also fixing those correlation issues from the wind tunnel, because they won't be winning a world championship at all next season if they can't develop well, which this season, I mean, they started to develop well. Obviously, in Canada, they roared back into life with a big front wing upgrade that put them back in the position to, fight for podiums and race wins. But since then, their car has not improved at all. So, yeah, Alpine, pretty decent pace. Racing Bulls as well. Williams, bit of a drop off from them, which is a bit of a surprise. Would have expected them to be a couple tenths of a second better off, given the type of pace they've shown in sectors with corners lately. Sauber, miles off, no surprise. And then we have Aston Martin, 1.5 seconds slower than McLaren in just the middle sector alone. How is that possible? How? That is. We're talking like Mana, Marussia, or Caterham levels of lap time there in terms of the loss compared to the quickest team. That is, that's about the level Aston Martin are on through the middle sector. And by the way, there is a video on Twitter going around of Zhou Guanyu and how he overtook Fernando Alonso, and it was at was it turn 7 or turn 8? It was like that hairpin type corner you've got in the middle sector. Alonso literally looked like he was driving a boat. I'm not even joking. Couldn't hit the apex to save his life. And then Zhou, who was also in a boat, a better boat, obviously at that time, took the position. But how? And, not just 1.5 seconds slower than McLaren, over half a second slower than Sauber in the middle sector. Sauber. The Sauber team that have, with their car, Sauber don't have any strengths at all. It is just an absolute basic, awful car. How is this possible? Again, I know they've gone back to the Japan spec, but even despite that, I still think this is shocking. So, yeah, just wow. That's all I'm going to say. Wow. So, yeah, Aston Martin. I think Aston Martin, if they keep this pace up, they could be lapped twice tomorrow. They really could. They were nearly lapped in the sprint race. If the sprint race went on for another, 5 laps, they would have been lapped in the sprint race. Remember, tomorrow, 71 laps. So, if it ends up being dry, then they will definitely get lapped once and probably twice. Just incredible. Not even Mana, when they were in Formula One last in 2016, were this bad. Nowhere near this bad. Just incredible. And then the final sector here in Brazil. I mean, it's only one real corner. The final, that corner at the bottom of the hill, Jinsao. And then after that, obviously, you're flat out until the start-finish line. So the final sector, you could say it's about straight line speed, but really it doesn't show us much of anything in terms of like the pecking order and stuff like that. But Ferrari were very quick in the final sector, so were McLaren and Haas. Racing Bulls decent, Alpine as well. Mercedes and Red Bull losing a bit in the final sector. Maybe that's because they've got a bit more wing on their car. Who knows? Williams, not great. Sauber and then Aston Martin still at the very back. But as I said, pecking order for qualifying in the dry, it should be McLaren, Ferrari and Red Bull, second and third. Again, close to cool. Mercedes fourth, Alpine and Haas fifth and sixth. And then Racing Bulls 7th, Williams 8th, Sauber 9th, and Aston Martin 10th. That's what it should be in dry conditions. In the wet, might get a couple changes, but I don't think it'll be as many as maybe people are expecting. But based on that data and what we've seen so far this weekend, let me get into my final qualifying prediction. And this qualifying prediction is based on if it is a dry race. Not dry race, a dry qualifying session. And I believe Lando Norris will, by a tenth of a second, take pole position from Oscar Piastri in second. Max Verstappen, I think, will end up just about taking third purely because I think he'll put in a really great lap, which he has done as of late. He's put in some really great qualifying laps to get him probably better results in qualifying than really has been deserved, let's say, for Red Bull. So, yeah, I think Verstappen will end up third. Obviously, that will then translate to starting 8th on the grid because of the 5-place penalty for a new ICE. And then Charles Leclerc, I think, will be 4th. Carlos Sainz 5th. George Russell 6th. Pierre Gasly, I'm going just about in 7th, ahead of Oliver Behrman 8th. Nico Hulkenberg 9th. And Lewis Hamilton, I think, will sneak into the top 10 and finish in 10th. So that is my qualifying prediction, guys, for this Sao Paulo Grand Prix. Now, I would update you guys about upgrades for certain teams, but there hasn't really been any. There's been one upgrade for Sauber, who have brought a new front suspension, but I thought there was no point making a graphic for that because, you know, there's really just no point. So, yeah, no upgrades really. So what I'm going to do for the next, say, half an hour is read out your comments in chat. And there you go. 48 minutes to go until qualifying begins in Brazil. So, yeah, post in the chat, what do you think is going to happen in this qualifying session? And just your general thoughts for this weekend's Grand Prix in general. Like I said, for the next 25-30 minutes, I'll go through your comments and then we'll get on to a couple final bits before the session. Also want to say, let's try and get these likes up if we can. We're on 21 likes. Let's try and get up to 50 plus likes if we can by the time qualifying begins. So make sure to smash that like button if you haven't already. And also make sure to subscribe for more content like this. Bottom right of the screen, do it right there. And yeah. Also, like I said, we've hit the like button. Make sure to do that because also really does help the channel out in the algorithm. So just trying to check, see if there's any further news on Twitter. And I can't see anything. But there is a tweet from an F1 journalist I've just seen where he sent a picture showing the rain that is, by the looks of it, on its way to the track. So it looks like we are going to have some rain soon. Again, not exactly sure when. But yeah, let's go through your comments in the chat. Good to see you all by the way. The Woden says, surprise, surprise, it was Johnny the Rat Herbert that was the steward giving Max penalties in Mexico. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, with Johnny Herbert and the stewards, in terms of the... Let me just adjust my chair a second so I'm more comfortable. There you go. In terms of the penalties they gave Max, whether it was because of bias towards Lando, again, there's no evidence to prove that from a legal standpoint, but Johnny Herbert is British and definitely likes Lando more than Max. We know that because he was on Sky Sports F1 and, yeah, was definitely more of a fan of Lando than he was Max. So it definitely could have contributed to the severity of the penalties he got last week. I still disagree with Max getting, 20 seconds worth of penalties. It should have been at least 5 seconds worth penalties, not 20. That was ridiculous. Any more than 10, I think, was over the line, definitely, from the stewards. But again, the reason they gave him 20 seconds worth was it was deliberate. It was to send Max Verstappen a message that his driving won't, his driving standards will not be tolerated. But whether Max will listen is, a completely different thing. As I said in my podcast, reviewing the Mexican Grand Prix, which, by the way, if you've not seen, make sure to go and check out on my channel. I said it in that Max Verstappen, he's like Michael Schumacher. He's not going to change the way he drives for anybody. That's the way he is, and people have just got to deal with that, I'm afraid, because even with if you look at Michael Schumacher, Michael did way worse on track than Max did or has done so far, and Michael was like that until the very end. That's just the way Michael was. He was never going to change because he thought that was the necessary way to defend his position. So again, he's not going to change. And one thing I did see was, what was it? I think Martin Brundle, he does he does a column on the Sky Sports website after every Grand Prix, and he was saying how Max's driving standards is going to taint his career. No, it fucking isn't. What a load of bullshit that is. Ayrton Senna and Michael Schumacher both were horrible when it came to defending their position. Maybe even worse than Max is. And look at their reputations or, their status unaffected. In fact, the way they defended their position has made, definitely with Senna, made him even more iconic than a lot of other great drivers. So, again, that is absolute bullshit. The way Max drives is not going to taint his career. Unless Max, blatantly cheats in major ways, then again, it's not going to affect his reputation in a massive way. Absolutely no way. So, yeah. But, with the penalties just got, it's a fair penalty. He was found to have exceeded the delta, and you're not allowed to do that under virtual safety car conditions. Therefore, penalty. So, he can't complain, and I don't think he will. It was just a small mistake from Max at the end of the day. The Woden says you get more wind tunnel time for not winning the constructors. I know, and yeah, Red Bull will have more wind tunnel time for the first half of next season than they did this year, but the aim is to win the Constructors' Championship, not make sure you have more wind tunnel time for the following season. So, Red Bull will not give a damn about having more wind tunnel time because to them, it's all about winning the Constructors' Championship. Bottle of FC, good to see, mate. Says, I'd imagine Ferrari will change their setup after the disappointing sprint race. Probably, yeah. And honestly, if I was Ferrari with Max taking a penalty, I would be tempted, if I was Ferrari, to put a wet setup on both cars. Because if it rains in qualifying, obviously that benefits you. But even if it's dry, again, Max is going to take a 5-place penalty. The only car they have to worry about is George Russell in the Mercedes, probably. Because obviously putting a wet setup on, that will compromise their top speed. But they might be able through the corners to make back up the difference to still be ahead of Mercedes. So yeah, if I was Ferrari, I'd put a wet setup on both cars, because looking at the weather tomorrow, it looks like it's going to be a wet race, and probably wet for the entire race. And that is the only way that Ferrari are going to win the race tomorrow, by the looks of it at the moment, is if they put a wet setup on, and then, if McLaren have more of a dry setup, then they can, come back at McLaren that way. But yeah, looking at the weather forecast for tomorrow, it's going to rain. There is no doubt about that. I'm just looking at the radar, and yeah, there's a massive rain shower. Probably going to have heavy rain for tomorrow's race. So that's what I would do if I was Ferrari, because clearly whatever they're doing in the dry is not working. Looney Classic says Red Bull has always been quick in sprints this year. It's the race where they collapse, especially on hard tires. Yeah, true. If Max can qualify, say, third, which is doable, definitely. Obviously, that means he'll start from 8th place. Even in the wet, I think, given Max's talent level, Max can still come back and finish on the podium. But at the end of the day, with tomorrow's race, with it being wet, we have seen so many times over the years wet races in Brazil produce absolute mental drama. So in terms of what happens tomorrow, we're just going to have to wait and see, because who knows what could happen. You could have half the field retire from the race. We could have 2 or 3 front runners crashing out. Lando Norris might spin and crash out of the race. Max Verstappen might spin and crash out of the race. Max Verstappen might get took out. Lando Norris could get took out. Literally anything could happen tomorrow, especially with how competitive the field is right now in Formula One. So, yeah, tomorrow we'll just have to see what happens. But I cannot wait for tomorrow's race, because I think tomorrow's race could be a classic. Remember the last couple wet races we've had this year? Silverstone and Canada was probably the 2 best races of the season. And what do you call it? The with the history of wet races at Interlagos, we really could be set up for something special. So yeah, I cannot wait for tomorrow. Hello to Yanni, by the way. Good to see you. Nicholas says, well, if I feel like if Max Verstappen could at least get a top 3 finish, no matter what Lando does, he can still win the championship by maybe 30 points. Well, if Lando Norris wins all the remaining races and the final sprint race in Qatar, and let's say Max finishes third in all of those races plus the sprint race, then the gap would be 34. The gap would Max Verstappen would end up winning the championship by 2 points, I think it would be. So yeah, for Max, literally all he has to do is finish on the podium every single race remaining, and he's the championship is his. But it's not as simple as that. I mean, how many races have we seen in the last few Grand Prix where Max has not been on the podium? Mexico, not Singapore, Baku, Monza, Spa, Hungary. There's been quite a few races since his last win back in Spain where he has not finished on the podium. So that's what I mean. We're at a very um we're at a very interesting point of the championship where one more big um say or one more bad result for Max could be the difference in whether Lando wins the championship or not. Because maybe not in Las Vegas, but definitely in Qatar and Abu Dhabi, you would expect McLaren will have the fastest cars on those weekends. Again, let's say this weekend, if Lando wins and Max finishes in sixth or lower, that result could be the real turning point of the championship. But again, we'll have to see. But as I said, Max Verstappen, all he has to do is keep finishing on the podium. And if he does that, he will win, literally, he will win the championship. Well, actually, one thing I am forgetting, of course, is if Lando takes the fastest lap in these final four races, then Lando would then win the championship by 2 points, I think. But Lando is not going to take the fastest lap for the final four races. Absolutely no chance. Because Red Bull will put a stop to that. Whether it's pitting Perez late on for it to do a fastest lap or pitting the Racing Bulls like they did in Singapore to get the fastest lap. They will do that if necessary. So, yeah. Like I said, as long as Max finishes on the podium for every Grand Prix remaining, the championship is his. But as to whether the championship goes down to the final race, it's going to be close. Remember, Max, coming out of the Qatar Grand Prix, Max will need, I think, it will need at least a 26-point lead in the championship to be champion in Qatar. So, the gap's 44 points. So Max needs to make sure that Lando doesn't outscore him by 18 points in between now and the end of the Qatar Grand Prix. But again, we will have to find out. Drew Blank Music, this is a mic crack problem with Aston Martin. No, it's got nothing to do with him. It's, to be fair to Aston Martin, it might not be to do with them at all. If it is the wind tunnel itself, then I mean, there's nothing they can do other than build their own wind tunnel. But I believe Aston Martin have built their own wind tunnel, but I don't know if or when it is ready to be used. I think, is it next year where Aston Martin, or is it this year? I don't know, where Aston Martin can start using their wind tunnel, because I know they've built a new wind tunnel. I'm pretty sure of that. Um, the Wonders as Alonso was driving a ferry and show a speedboat, pretty much. Yeah. Sammy LJ says, if this isn't British bias, then I don't know what is. Even with all of this, they can't pull Max down. He will prevail. Fighting talk there. Again, you can't prove it that Johnny is biased, but I will say that I do think that it is a um I do think it is a bit of a conflict of interest. I know not all people, ex drivers or whatever from the same nation support British drivers over others. I get that, but you'd think that the FIA, to eliminate the possible accusations of that, you'd think they would go for like a neutral party, like I don't know, a Spanish steward, like I don't know, Pedro de la Rosa would be a good one. Um, or someone who isn't Dutch or British, but yeah, the British stewards is very common in Formula One, unfortunately, um, because of obviously the influence that this country, that obviously I live in, has in Formula One. Obviously, a lot of the teams are based here. So many drivers. Formula One is, the actual headquarters is in the UK, so it's something that's hard to escape from, to be honest. Before though we go on any further, just saying a tweet from Chris Medland from 10 minutes ago saying the FIA weather radar showing heavy thunderstorms for the next hour, could be a delayed qualifying. Well, if I just switch over on my end to the Sky Sports F1 coverage, let's see. Well, I can't see at the moment what the weather is like, but the Sky F1 crew are stood indoors ish by the looks of it. I don't know if they've got umbrellas up, but yeah, I can't tell how bad the weather is, unfortunately, until they cut to a wider shot. And oh god, yeah, it is raining pretty heavily. So yeah, we'll see in terms of when qualifying gets underway. There's no news as to qualifying being delayed or whatever. So yeah, we'll have to see. But looking at the current track conditions, I wouldn't be surprised if qualifying is delayed. But one thing I am going to do before we go any further is I am just going to post a link of the stream back out one final time before I read any more of your comments. So keep them coming. And yeah, I'll just post a link of the stream out. Come join us to, and yeah, pretty big, heavy rain shower we're going to be putting up with by the looks of it for a while. Come join us to watch along a wet qualifying session in Brazil that promises to be a thriller. And there you go. So let me come back to reading your comments in the chat again when it comes to the announcement of a delay to qualifying. I will let you guys know when the news obviously is filtered out. Let me find some other comments here. Ronan says, get rid of the stewards. Ronan says time for proper wet tyres. Yeah, we'll be seeing those quite a lot, I think, from this point forward in the weekend. The Woden says Horner said many times World Drivers' Championship over constructors. I don't know why he would be saying that because it just doesn't make sense. Because the most important thing for the team is the constructors' championship. So I don't know why he's so devoted or dedicated to Max, whatever you want to call it. I just don't get it. I really don't get it. I know, Max is an amazing driver, but, you know, the team always should come first. The Woden says it's not even the nationality, it's the fact that Herbert used to make a living slating Max on TV. There's also that with Johnny is, like you say, it's not just the nationality, but there is evidence that he is not as favourable towards Max as he is towards, say, Lando. Which again, you'd think if the FIA knew that they would avoid, employing Herbert as a steward to avoid any possible accusations, but they just don't care clearly. Ronan says, why is Herbert even commenting in the media this week about Verstappen? Man was a ridiculous pundit that has now turned into a ridiculous steward. Yeah, as a pundit, I wasn't a fan of him. He was basically just the comedy relief on Sky F1. Um, and yeah, I even though I didn't like him though, he's not as bad as other pundits Sky have had. Paul di Resta, obviously, thank God he's gone. Damon Hill though, I think might be the worst of them all because Damon's perspective is completely warped by his experiences with Michael Schumacher. And because Michael treated him a certain way on track, he is so incredibly sensitive, like baby sensitive, to any sort of aggressive driving. And it just pisses me off with Damon. And he constantly, it gets brought up. Oh, your battles with Michael. It's like, who cares? It was 30 fucking years ago. Get over it. You know what I mean? He didn't kill you on track. And I know, what he did in Adelaide was bad, but again, get over it. 30 fucking years ago. But he hasn't, and that's just the way he is. But I don't like Damon at all. Um, the word says no one cares or remembers about the constructors champion. That's not true. That's absolutely not true. When it comes to determining like who the best teams of all time are, it's all about the constructors championships, and also for the team, the constructors absolutely matters because the constructors championship shows how good of a team you are at the end of the day, and you know, there's no excuses if you do finish poorly in the constructors championship. So it absolutely does matter, which is why McLaren and Ferrari are so desperate to win the constructors championship, not just because they're desperate to win the championship, but because it's been so long for both teams since they won the Constructors' Championship. McLaren, the last time McLaren won the Constructors' Championship was the year I was born. That was the last time McLaren won the Constructors. That's a long time ago. We're talking, 26 years? And then with Ferrari, 16 years ago. Last championship they won was the Constructors title in 2008, and they won it right here in Brazil. So for those two teams, it absolutely does matter. Because when it's all said and done, this particular era of Formula One, we will look back at who won the Constructors' Championships and who finished where to determine, how successful certain team principals were and how certain teams were. And obviously for Zak Brown, who took over McLaren properly in 2017, this will be the completion of his not life's work, but the completion of his main goal that he's had for the last few years, which is to return McLaren to winning championships, especially the Constructors' Championship. The Woden says Damon is fidgety and weird on camera. I think he is drugged up. Plus, he was one of the worst world champions ever. I think he's just got. I think it's just anxiety. I think that's why he comes across like that. I don't think it's. I don't think it's. I don't think it's. Drugs or anything. He's always been like that. He's even though he's on camera a lot, he's not great in front of camera. Ronan says, I mean, it's time to see the tyres that can actually withstand wet weather. Current tyres have not been good enough for years. Exactly. There's been plenty of complaints about the wet compound tyres for the last couple years, but they appear to be improving on that. Todd says that VSC timing was clearly delayed until McLaren swapped cars. Utter crap. Yeah, that was um that was that was rubbish. Absolute rubbish. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about, if you didn't watch the sprint, basically what happened was Nico Hulkenberg broke down and parked up next to the track towards the end of the lap. And the virtual safety car, it was obvious it was going to come out, but it didn't come out until like way after it should have come out. And conveniently, for McLaren, it came out after they were able to swap cars. Again, the FIA, they don't help themselves, do they, when it comes to preventing accusations of bias. They don't help themselves. Because, that looked absolutely horrible. Yanni says, I never liked Schumacher. I was neutral on Hill, but yes, he needs to move on and get over it. I mean, obviously, I wasn't even alive back then when those two were fighting, but from a British perspective, the British perspective of that battle between Damon and Michael in terms of in '94 and '95 that they had, all they focus on is the crashes, and all they try to, the narrative is, oh, Michael was, Damon was trying to overcome the dangerous Michael Schumacher who, was just trying to crash into Damon any chance he could, which is complete rubbish. Yeah, in Adelaide, Michael deliberately crashed into Damon to win the championship. That is, we all know that. But in 1995, what happened was Michael Schumacher in a slower car not just beat, but destroyed Damon Hill, especially mentally that season. He bullied and destroyed Damon Hill. And that's why Damon is still so salty about that whole rivalry because the 1995 season is the reason Williams dropped Damon Hill at the end of 1996 because Damon was so bad in 95. And again, he was in the fastest car and he ended up not winning the championship and ended up not winning it by quite a margin. And towards the end of that season, Damon was pathetic in terms of his performances. He was that bad that Frank Williams got together with Patrick Head and decided that they were not going to renew Damon's contract, which was up at the end of 96, and that they were going to go after Heinz Harald Frentzen. That's why it was announced, I think, mid-season in Hungary, if that in the 96 season, and the Hungarian Grand Prix, which was like late July, it was announced that Damon was not going to be in the Williams team for 97. And the reason, again, that is because Damon was so bad in 95 and got absolutely bullied and destroyed by Schumacher that Williams decided they needed a replacement. They needed someone who could compete better. Now, Frentzen obviously was never a rival for Schumacher, was never even close to Michael in terms of being on the same level. But back then, when Heinz Harald Frentzen was at Sauber, who were back then, they were a new team, Frentzen was very highly rated. People thought Frentzen was a future world champion. Then he went to Williams and we found out actually he wasn't that good. But at the time, Frentzen was thought to be the next big thing. So that's why they were like, right, let's get rid of Damon and get Frentzen in the car. So, that season, the 95 season, where Michael just annihilated Damon, I think Damon is still, to a degree, salty about that because it ruined his career. Even though Damon won the championship in 96, he could have won maybe another championship in 97 had he not been dropped by Williams. But the reason, again, he was dropped by Williams is because he was so bad in 1995. And if anyone wants to debate it, you can. But in 1995, Damon Hill was terrible. Absolutely terrible. The title campaign that he put up that season was one of the worst we've ever seen in Formula One history. It was pathetic. So many times he crashed out of the race on his own. I think Hockenheim that year, end of the first lap, bins it in the first corner. What was it? Nürburgring. I don't know if he was in the lead, but I think he might have been fighting with Michael, and then he just spun off a curb and crashed. Again, awful mistake. Obviously crashed with Michael twice that year, but both times it was Damon's fault. At Silverstone, he went for a dive bomb on Michael towards the end of the lap and blatantly took Michael off. Don't know how the narrative is that Damon and Michael, like it was a 50-50. It was not. Damon clearly took Michael out of the race. And then at Monza, Damon just piled into the back of Michael and they took each other out the second chicane. Or sorry, should I say Damon took Michael out at the second chicane. So, as looking at the track, by the way, yeah, we are definitely not going to have qualifying starting on time. No chance of that. So yeah, the point I'm trying to make is Michael Schumacher, he didn't just take a championship away from him. He ruined his career. That's why he's still bitter. And the fact he's still bitter is why I don't like him. And yet, race control have officially announced the start of qualifying will be delayed. They haven't said for how long or when until, but if the rain keeps up as it is, we might not even get a qualifying session because it's way too wet for there to be any cars on track. It is hammering down so hard. So, yeah. But yeah, let me know what you thought of what I just, had to say there about Damon and all. Um, and one thing I am gonna do is change the text on that countdown bit because obviously the session is delayed. And let me just, there you go. So yeah, session delayed until the track gets into good enough condition where we can have a session, but we'll have to find out whenever that is. But personally, I'm not going to be waiting around for 2 or 3 hours. So, it says there will be a further update in 10 minutes, which is when it was due to start. The Woda says quali will be tomorrow before the race. Looking at the weather forecast, I wouldn't be surprised. A big thing, though, that could cause that to happen that we have to remember is there's not a ton of daylight left. In 10 minutes' time, it's going to be 3 p.m. local time. Sunset is at 6:20 p.m. So we've only got 3.5 hours left until there can no longer be a qualifying session. So I'd say there's a pretty decent chance we don't get qualifying today. Cheers, Nib, saying you're going to enjoy the 2 hour delay. If it gets to what do you call it? We'll have to see. Let's see how the next hour goes in terms of the weather and whether it's going to improve or not. But if we get to an hour from now and it's still hammering down, like really hammering down, then there's a chance that I could come off the stream because I don't want to be waiting around for 2 or 3 hours for maybe half an hour of qualifying. Woden says Damon only got that car because of what happened to Senna, so Senna would have won multiple world championships in that car. I mean, yeah, Damon was very fortunate to get into the position he did. Obviously, he, no one expected to happen what happened with, Senna and just all of that, what happened. But I've said it before and I'll say it again. If Damon Hill could be as competitive in fighting for the championship as he was in that car, then Ayrton Senna definitely would have won at least one championship with Williams. I think Senna would have won both 94 and 95 in the Williams. Now, there is that story that Senna had a pre-contract agreement to go to Ferrari in 96. How that would have changed F1 history. Whether Senna actually would have gone to Ferrari is debatable because Senna was that hungry to win that, if he was already in the best car, would he have then gone to Ferrari, who were miles away from winning championships at that point? Who knows? But Senna was that good, like Michael, that, he could have won a championship, say, in 97, say, with Ferrari, like Michael almost did. So, yeah, it's a what if in it with Senna, but we'll never know. We'll never know. Um, I think the biggest what if with Senna is not necessarily the championships, but it's, how much longer would have he continued to race for? Because that really determines the amount of championships he then could have won. Because let's say he lived and he retired in, let's say he retired at the end of 1998, then he probably would have retired with 6, maybe 7 championships. But yeah. Woden says WEC is still on for an hour. Unfortunately, I can't watch that at the moment. Nicholas says, I never actually knew what happened about Hill versus Michael Schumacher in that season. I don't see why Hill is so upset about Michael Schumacher ruining his career. Because he's bitter. That's why. He's a bitter old man. That is just that's just facts. He is a bitter old man. And yeah, to be bitter for a while over what happened in Adelaide, where Michael, did what he did, that's understandable. But still to this day, come on, get over it. Even though Alain Prost obviously still disagrees massively with what Senna did at the first corner at Suzuka in 1990, Prost forgave Senna sooner than Damon has Michael, and Prost forgave Senna 3-4 years later. It's 30 years later, and Damon's still bitter. But again, it was the 1995 season. That was the season that Damon, I think, is more so bitter about, because, like I said, Michael just ruined his career. The Wodus, I think Senna would have wanted to equal or beat Fangio. Yeah, I know some people talk about, he wouldn't have wanted to surpass Fangio because of his respect for him. I disagree with that. I think Senna was that much of a monster when it came to winning that I think he would have been gagging at the prospect of winning the most championships in F1 history. Ayrton Senna is basically Formula One's version of Michael Jordan, in terms of, possibly you could argue, him being the best of all time, but also in terms of his mentality towards competing. Senna and Jordan are, exactly the same for me. Just absolute mentality monsters. So, yeah, the prospect of Senna, winning another championship, I think he would have gone and took it 100%. But yeah, if some of you have never checked out what happened in the 1995 season, go and I'm sure you can find online a season review for 1995, or if you've got a subscription to F1, like the F1 archive on the F1 website, I'm sure they'll have something on there, and you can go back and watch those races from that year. It's actually a pretty underrated season, 1995. Lots of really good, exciting races, but it was never really... People never really talk about the season a lot because Michael ended up dominating the championship in the end. But it was a really exciting season. You had, Benetton and Williams fighting closely all the time. for the championship. Ferrari obviously won a race, and they had a few races where they could have won. Obviously, Johnny Herbert won a couple races. David Coulthard won a race. Should have won more than one that year. Um, yeah, there was plenty of stories that year. And I'd say, honestly, especially with the 90s, I'd say 1995 is probably one of the most underrated seasons of that period in terms of how good of a season it was. Because I think looking back, people only remember certain years purely because of whether the championship was close or not. But there's been seasons in Formula One where we've had the championship won a few races before the end, yet it's still been an exciting season. 2019 was a great example where, Hamilton dominated the championship, but that was an exciting season once we got midway through. So I'm seeing here a tweet from Philip Horton, who is a Formula One journalist. He says the FIA has a window to run qualifying today. Sunset is in 3.5 hours. Interlagos still in the midst of heavy rain. Then a brief dry window. Then another storm. If the ADAR, Jesus Christ, if the radar is accurate, then Sunday morning qualifying is still an option. Well, how brief is that dry part of the forecast? Because if we're talking like no more than half an hour, then I don't see how we're going to get qualifying in. Looney Classics. How old were you in 1995, Chazza? I was -3 in 1995. Yeah, I wasn't even alive, but I love Formula One history. I absolutely love it, and I've gone back and watched all the season reviews, a lot of old races. I love old Formula One, and I know people rave about the 1980s being a great decade, but the 90s is very underrated. A lot of great races in the 90s, and yeah, I think I think the reason the 80s gets rated so highly is because the quality of drivers was just so good. Obviously, you had Senna, Prost, Mansell, PK, Lauda, Keke Rosberg, Alan Jones. Like, it was, really, really high level. But yeah, the 90s, obviously, there was a drop off in quality. Obviously, Senna dying was a part of that, that kind of uh, maybe halted Formula One's popularity for quite a few years. Because, and again, if only Senna had not had that accident, because we had had such an exciting era of, Senna versus Prost. We were then going to move into Senna versus Schumacher, the master versus the apprentice, pretty much what we had with Lewis and Max in 2021. And if Senna had lived, maybe that's what we would have got with Senna and Schumacher, that level of racing and also accidents and poor driving standards. Especially with those two, it would have been unbelievable what they would have got up to, the antics. But yeah, that really hurt Formula One's popularity because Michael didn't have a direct rival in terms of someone who was on his level. Damon Hill was not on Michael's level. He was never on Michael's level at any point ever. Nor was Jacques Villeneuve. Hakkinen was, but Schumacher was just so much better in the races than Hakkinen. That's why Michael, even in a slower car, was able to compete with Hakkinen for the championships. But yeah, if only Senna had lived, Michael would have had a proper rival of the same level to fight with, because again, when Senna passed, Michael was the only elite level driver for a few years until you could say, yeah, Hakkinen, and then after Hakkinen left, you had to wait then until Kimi, Raikkonen, and then Fernando Alonso. Montoya, you could probably throw in there as well, purely because of his speed. But it does kind of hurt Michael's legacy. Not that obviously he could do anything about it, that he wasn't able to compete in his absolute prime against, say, an Ayrton Senna. Because, again, in his prime, he was competing against Damon Hill, again, not on his level. Jacques Villeneuve, not on his level. Hakkinen was a very good driver, but I don't think Hakkinen was an all-time great level driver. So yeah, again, it does hurt Michael's legacy, unfortunately, because when you look at Senna, obviously Senna competed against Prost, Mansell, PK, multiple say elite level drivers, and same with Lewis Hamilton. Lewis obviously competed against Raikkonen, Alonso, Vettel. Um, you know, Rosberg, Max. So, yeah. As oh god, I've just seen, and Nib has just sent me this on Twitter. This is a story breaking 10 minutes ago from Auto Motor and Sport. As you guys all know, I've used them before for sources for stories. They are very reliable. Toby Grunner, who's a top journalist for them and a top journalist in general, he's just tweeted, there is another storm brewing in the paddock. Red Bull is suspecting McLaren and a few other teams of filling water into the tyres to prevent them from overheating during the race. Is that even... I'm not a tyre expert. Is that even possible to do that? That literally sounds insane. Filling the tires with water. Can you fill tires with water? And if so, does it actually help? That is a new one. I've never heard of that. Looney Classic says the 90s were so golden in terms of music, movies, and sports. We had MJ in basketball, Madonna and Michael Jackson and Michael in F1. Yeah, Michael's everywhere, didn't you, back then? But yeah, I was born in '98, so I'm a 2000s kid, really. But yeah, I was born. I'm not going to say when I was born, but I was born in between the final race of '97 and the first race of '98. That's all I'm going to say. So yeah, the last person, or the final thing in F1 to happen before I was born was obviously the infamous Jerez '97 Championship Showdown. That's how old I am in terms of when I was born. Tomo Power says, hi Chaz, I feel sometimes people forget that higher level, the better drivers will be. That's how the sport evolves. Today the field is closer. Absolutely. The field, I would say, in terms of the quality of the grid, I think the quality of the grid now is the best I would say the best it's ever been. In terms of potential world champions combined with the world champions that already are on the grid. You've got, Max, Lewis, Fernando, and then obviously Leclerc, Norris, Piastri, Russell, Antonelli obviously coming onto the grid next season. The quality of the grid, I don't think has been any stronger than it is now. The only other eras I can think of that you could argue is maybe 2012, 2013-ish, you could say. And then probably, yeah, the 80s, when you add, say, Senna, Prost, PK, Mansell, say all at their prime, which would have been, say, late 80s, maybe very early 90s. Um, the Woden says, yeah, with different types of gas, you get better cooling. They banned the use of different gases years ago. Right, and I've just been sent a translation of the article, so let me just read it to you guys. So it says, in Brazil, it was Red Bull's turn again in the role of prosecutor. This time it's about filling water into the tyre. The trick is intended to help cool the tyres better from the inside over long distances. The water is to be injected via the valves. The water... oh no, I've just read that bit. Supposedly, even small amounts achieve the desired effect. Several teams are expected to benefit from this practice in the long run, including McLaren. The FIA is already investigating the allegations. At the last two races in Austin and Mexico City, there had been no suspicious observations. Pirelli would have to report the slightest irregularities to the FIA's technical commissioners. According to the Italian tyre manufacturer, however, there has not been a single suspicion this year. Neither Pirelli nor the FIA want to comment officially on the case. Behind closed doors, however, it can be heard that the story is considered another storm in a teacup. Then it goes on to say, how does the water get into the tyre? When using the trick, the first question must be how the water is supposed to get into the tyres in the first place without Pirelli noticing, and how the water should disappear after the race, except through evaporation. Tyres and rims are coded. The FIA randomly assigns the tyres to the rims entered by the teams. The fitting and disassembly of the tyres is carried out by Pirelli's service technicians. After the tyres are fitted, no team is allowed to manipulate them. The teams themselves do not have the tools to remove tyres from the rim and put them back on. The tyres cannot be reused again after they have been removed once. The only access through which water can be filled is, therefore, the valve, but injecting fluids unnoticed would be extremely difficult with the number of watchdogs and Pirelli engineers in the garages. Such a trick would also be highly risky. If the water does not evaporate before the tyres are dismantled in the 3 to 4 hours after the race, you quickly come under suspicion. Supposedly, Red Bull had experimented with water in the tyre itself many years ago. At that time, the trick was not yet expressly prohibited, but the FIA promptly closed this loophole. In the defending champions camp, it is now assumed that former Red Bull employees have unpacked and refined this trick again with their new teams. That was a lot, but yeah, there's no way. There is absolutely no way. Because, like the article said, you would eventually get caught by Pirelli because they would notice the irregularities in terms of the tires. They would notice eventually. So if they were doing this over a multitude of races, eventually they get caught. So, how are they able to... The only way that would be possible is if they, right before the start of the race, injected it with water and then it, evaporated, before the end of the race, in a way that Pirelli couldn't detect, but I don't see how that's possible. So, yeah, I think Red Bull are absolutely crazy for thinking that. Him saying Rob Marshall Masterclass. I've never heard of anyone even trying that. So, yeah. I mean, you guys can let me know what you think of that, but I do not see how you could get away with that. Maybe for one race if you're lucky, but multiple races? No way. Come on. No way. I think Red Bull, they just can't accept that other teams have got better and they've got worse. The Woden says, let's be honest, McLaren are up to something. They're a customer team. They shouldn't be beating Mercedes. No, they're not up to something at all. McLaren have genuinely got the best car on the grid. They're not using tricks. They're not using, you know, there's nothing on their car that's illegal. It's absolutely fine, their car. And you say there's no way they could be beating the works Mercedes. Well, there is, because, I mean, for one, they're doing it with a legal car. But, go look and look at the end of the V8 era where you had Red Bull beating Renault. Not just beating Renault, they were lapping Renault at times because Red Bull just had a much better car in terms of downforce, and that's why McLaren are ahead of Mercedes, because they have more downforce than Mercedes do. At the end of the day, if you've got the same power unit as someone else, all you've got to do, I know it sounds easy, but it's not. All you got to do is have better downforce than the other car, and you'll have a better car. Simple as. So when it comes to comparing two different teams, it's all about downforce, which is something I have to say is one thing that pisses me off when it comes to 2026. Is we've heard rumors that Mercedes, they're looking really good with the new power units, and Mercedes, the works team, they're going to be the team to beat. And have people forgot that McLaren are also going to be having a Mercedes power unit? All McLaren have got to do in 2026 is have more downforce than Mercedes, and McLaren will have the best car in 2026 if, of course, the Mercedes power unit is as good as people are saying it's going to be. So, and that was why at the time, when McLaren moved from Mercedes to Honda back in 2014 into 15, I always had a problem with it because I was like, you've got the best power unit on the grid. Now you just got to focus on increasing downforce and you'll get to Mercedes' level. But no, they went and changed power unit. And now, and look what happened. But it's been said for so many years, you can't win the championship as a customer team. I've always thought that was bullshit. And McLaren are about to prove it's bullshit because they're about to win the Constructors' Championship as a customer team. The reason none of Mercedes' customers after 2014 could compete with Mercedes was because it was Williams and Force India and Manor and Lotus and teams like that, teams that couldn't possibly compete with them. But McLaren, again, gave up the best power unit on the grid. And that was really why they went backwards massively for so many years, is because they gave that up. Ashley Moore says they have improved by over a second elapsed since Miami. Clearly, they are doing something differently. The question is it legal or not? To say they're doing nothing is a bit silly. I'm not saying they're doing nothing. They've upgraded. The reason they've improved by that much since then is because they've improved their car. McLaren are very good at upgrading their car. We've seen that in the last year and a half, that when they put upgrades on, it improves their car. They get better every time, pretty much. Red Bull haven't improved as much with the upgrades they've put on the car. So, that's what it's down to. As McLaren have improved, Red Bull have stood still, and you can't stand still in Formula One. Look at Aston Martin; they've been standing still all season, and now I've got the worst car on the grid. Crystal Racing, does Red Bull with Renault power between 2010 and 13 count as customers? I definitely for 2010. Maybe you could say not for 2011, but I think definitely 2010 you can say, yeah, customer team. Looney Classics asks, why can't people accept McLaren as a good team? Why accuse them of cheating with no evidence? I mean, one, it's because, I think to a degree, obviously, Red Bull fans are unhappy that, McLaren are in the position they're in, which is understandable, but, to accuse them of cheating when there's no evidence is, obviously wrong. But I think also, to a degree, people just can't believe how much they've improved. Because at the start of 2023, a year and a half ago, they had one of the worst cars on the grid. Now they have the best car on the grid. The reason, though, they've got the best car on the grid is not just because their upgrades have really worked. It's also because of the cost cap and the rules about how much wind tunnel time you're allowed compared to other teams, which again shows that those rules have worked. Because if we didn't have a cost cap and those wind tunnel regulations, McLaren would not be in the position they're in now. There'd be maybe midfield runners, maybe front runners, but not race winning contenders, because Red Bull, with the resources and money they've got, and Ferrari would have pulled away so long ago that McLaren would not be able to keep up. Ashley Moore says McLaren have mastered the art of bendy wings back in front. That appears to be the difference since Ferrari adopted the same principle. They've jumped forward in performance. Yeah, if that is why they're so quick, then then that's the way it is. But they are they are abiding by the regulations until the FIA say different. When is qualifying starting? We don't know because it's been delayed because of rain. So, yeah. But yeah, we're qualifying was supposed to start 25 minutes ago. But, yeah. It's, yeah, raining. Will F1 says Newey leaving Red Bull has clearly had an effect on that team, regardless of what people say. I think definitely. I mean, he basically left the team in, what was it, like May or June? He was basically gone. And yeah, I think in terms of finding solutions to whatever issues they've had since then, I think they've missed him definitely because, he is the smartest guy in Formula One in terms of, the aero side of things. I know Red Bull say, oh, we've been phasing him out over time, but I think that's contributed to their downfall at the end of the day. And they will regret the day they chose Christian Horner over Adrian Newey. Um, Let me see if I can find some other comments I've not read yet. Actually, more saying when a customer team is 25 seconds in a race faster than the works team, something's definitely wrong. Yeah, the issues with the Mercedes, I think it's pretty simple. Firstly, even though they improved the car mid-season, the fundamental design is flawed. Because I mean, look at what they were doing at the start of the season. At the start of the season, they were closer to the midfield than they were to the front. They were losing in the race. They were losing like a second per lap to the front runner. So fundamentally, the car, in terms of its design, again, is flawed. It's not as good fundamentally as the McLaren, the Ferrari, or the Red Bull. That's just a fact. Yes, they improved it mid-season, but they've not kept up with the rate of development. That front wing upgrade was great, but again, since then they've not improved their car, and because they've had issues with this now for 2 or 3 years, correlation from the wind tunnel to the track. That's why they're inconsistent with upgrades, where some upgrades work and some don't. That's just the way Mercedes have been for the last 2 to 3 years. So we know what the issues with Mercedes are. If their wind tunnel worked perfectly, Mercedes might be fighting for the championship right now. But it's not, and those issues are still there. They have not fixed them, and until they fix them, they won't be winning any championship in 2025. Um, Crystal Racing's. I remember this story. McLaren realizing giving 50p Freddos was not a good incentive, made them a serious team again. That was the lowest, absolute lowest point for them, wasn't it? I remember it was that was a couple weeks before I started this channel. Obviously, I was on my old channel back then. Yeah, you had Fredo Gate, where mechanics were complaining that they weren't. Was it uh, they were being overworked or whatever? And yeah, 2018 was so bad for McLaren. Similar, to be fair, to what Aston Martin are having this year. So, Aston Martin need to take that as inspiration, because look at what McLaren have done since then. Only got better, and now, 6 years later, they're consistent race winning, championship contending team. The word says they didn't choose Horner over Newey. Stroll offered him shares in Aston Martin and shed load of cash. There's a reason he offered him that, and that's because Red Bull were phasing him out and getting rid of him. And also, Newey was looking to leave because of the Christian Horner allegations, let's put it that way, from the start of this season. So, if it wasn't for that, and if Red Bull had, I think, done the right thing, which was sack Christian Horner, which I know we haven't talked about that whole controversy in months, but I still think getting rid of him was the right decision. Then I think Red Bull would be in a better position, 100%. Because Red Bull, since then, they've lost Adrian Newey to Aston Martin. Helmut Marko, he's still at Red Bull, but for how much longer, I don't know. Probably another couple years at the most. Jonathan Wheatley is leaving Red Bull, and I think, isn't Jonathan Wheatley, I think he's becoming team principal of Sauber, isn't he? So their most key personnel, are being lost because of this. And again, they chose Horner they chose keeping him over possibly losing key members of the team. Not just key members of the team, but more important members of the team. The Woden says, do you know him personally? I don't need to know him personally to know what the situation was. It was well reported at the time that, Red Bull, they were to a degree beginning to phase him out and, phase him away from the Formula One project. But ultimately, the reason Adrian decided to leave is because of the Christian Horner allegations towards the start of this year. That's what triggered him to decide to leave when he did. Todd says Helmut and Yoss are the ones that need to go. They would be in a worse position if they let Helmut go, trust me, than if they got rid of Horner. The thing with Horner is, he's had a great career. He is a great team principal. There is no doubt about that. But his job is his job at the end of the day is putting the right people in place, hiring the right people, and getting the best out of his team. That's pretty much what his job is. His job is not to design the car. He's not Colin Chapman. He is involved in discussions when it comes to drivers, but ultimately Helmut Marko is the one making the decisions. And in terms of the performance of, the pit crew and that, again, that's down to other people. His responsibility is putting the right people in the right positions and making sure that he gets the best out of them. And ultimately, if it doesn't go right, he is held responsible. But, if Horner was got rid of and they replaced him with, say, Jonathan Wheatley or Paul Monahan, who, is at Red Bull, they'd be in a better, I guarantee they'd be in a better position now. Because Adrian would still be at the team and still contributing, even if it's like as a consultant, he'd still be contributing and helping out. You wouldn't have Jonathan Wheatley leaving the team, who's a very important member of that team and has been for years. You wouldn't have Max Verstappen potentially leaving. And if they lose him, that is a massive blow for them. So, yeah, he's done great in terms of who he's hired and who he's put in what position and getting the best out of them. He's done great at that. But, at the end of the day, the team principle is, it's not all down your success as a team to who the team boss is. Because, like I said, the team boss's job is hiring the right people for the right positions, putting them in the right places, and getting the best out of them. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the right personnel, you won't win anything. Red Bull had the right personnel already pretty much in place, but now are starting to lose them because of that whole situation that really divided the team. Estimated time of qualifying start apparently is 1,600 hours, which is in 25 minutes time. The radar's showing a fairly big gap too, so there's a chance we might be able to go qualify soon. Well, I hope so. We will see. So, let me get the timer back on screen in case we are going to be starting. And nope, not 45 minutes. There you go. 25 minutes to go until apparently the session is going to start, but I still I have a lot of doubts about that. By the way, Rook, good to see you in chat. By the way, if you are looking at a weather radar on your end, like a website, then post a link in the chat so I can have a look. Because all I've got is BBC weather, which a lot of the time can be good, but is not as precise um as other, weather systems or weather radars. Crystal Racing says, but there comes a point leaders decline. Frank built Williams, but losing Newey and Renault was costly. Dennis made McLaren into a Goliath, but Spygate and Honda and 15 ended him. Yeah, and eventually Horner's time will come, but I think I said it a few months ago, and I'll say it again. Was it really worth losing other key personnel, more important than Horner, to keep Horner? And no, it was not. They could have, again, they could have replaced him with Jonathan Wheatley or someone like that, and I think be in a stronger position today and also for the future. Cheers, Rook. Let me have a look. Well, I'm looking at the radar. I mean, yeah, there is a let me just wait for it to. I mean, yeah, there is a break in the weather, but whether it's good enough to what do you call it? Whether it's good enough for us to actually start qualifying, I don't know. Rook says, though, I'm just quoting for the F1 site, they're looking at their own radar. Right, well, what we're going to do is we're just going to wait and see. Obviously, I'll keep reading your comments out in the chat, so keep them coming, guys. And make sure to keep smashing the like button as well. As we're on 49 likes, let's try and get up to 60 plus likes if we can in the next, 20 minutes or so. That'd be great if we could do that. Woda says Horner has proven he can lead the team even through hard times back to the top. You don't just sack a guy like that. Just because he has had success does not excuse you from being fired for what he did. What he did obviously has nothing to do with Formula One and on track racing. And just because he's got a great resume doesn't mean he shouldn't be sacked. The allegations again had nothing to do with Formula One, so the decision should not have come down to, well, he's really good at his job. That should have nothing to do with that decision. So, like I said, the people they're losing and potentially are going to be losing in the future because of this are more important to the team than he is. And Red Bull will regret deciding to keep him over, keeping Adrian at the team and potentially Max Verstappen, who, we thought this time last year, we thought Max Verstappen was going to be at Red Bull for the rest of his life, really. And, now there's a pretty good chance that Max next season could be Max's final season at Red Bull. Nobody thought that was possible a year ago, and it's all because of those allegations and the divide it has caused within the team. But the people that made that decision, I think the tie owners who have the I think slight majority in the ownership, they haven't read the room because the 49% share of Red Bull that is, I think, just the more say the European side of the team, they all wanted him gone. It was the owners, again the majority owners from Thailand. They are the ones backing him. So that's the only reason he's at the team. Um, Looney Classic says they did not fire Horner because he's hard to replace. If he was anyone else, he would have been gone. But it's not anyone else. So F1 has to do with him not getting sacked. I disagree with that. I think they could have replaced him internally. Whether it would have, um, whether whoever they would have replaced him with would have been as good, it's a different story. But I think they could have replaced him and still maintained a good enough level. I don't think they would have fell apart as a team as much as they have done by keeping him. Darth Lord Rem says, doesn't Horny Horner need a penalty of some kind like they do all the time? The driver's way, he never really got a penalty, did he? Ashley Moore says, if everyone in racing all over the world had to stand down because of a single affair, there would be no racing above under 12 go kart. It wasn't because he was having an affair, it was because it was he was doing it with an employee and it was a clear power imbalance within the team because obviously he's the boss and she was just I don't know what exact position she had, but from what I understand, she was just a regular employee, and there was a clear again power imbalance. Then for me, it was clearly in terms of her leaving the team. I think clearly it raised very clear ethical issues. So it's not about he had an affair. I mean, obviously that's another part of it that he fucked up on, which is more for him to deal with in his personal life. But it's not, you don't get, you're not going to get sacked if you have an affair with someone. But again, it's about the ethics of having a relationship like that between you and someone else at work. But again, with that power imbalance, it raises ethical issues. And I think he, from the evidence I saw and the evidence I think most people have seen, I think he did use his power as boss unethically. And I think because of how it divided the team, I think the best decision was to part company with him. And the word is saying was it this was a catfish attempt. It was not a catfish attempt. There's no evidence of that. And yeah, Chris Rose is saying misconduct allegations in the workplace. That's pretty much what it was. Ashley Moore says only she was aware she was having an affair with two people on the same team. That's complete bullshit, what you just said. Complete bullshit. Of course, he was aware that he was also having an affair with someone else who's in the same team. What are you on about? um, she was having an affair with Max's father and Hornet. Again, there's no evidence of that. With with Max's dad. Again, no evidence of that. That's just complete rubbish. Um, Woden saying woke take. It's not woke take. It's just you can't having a relationship, to be honest, with another coworker is personally I it's not something that I would go for because it's just for me a bit awkward, especially if you break up with that person. But if you are the boss of a big organization like he is, it's funny, he's actually talking on Sky F1 right now. If you're the boss of an organization as big as Red Bull, the Formula One team, and you're having an affair and a relationship with a worker who's got obviously way less power than the team, but it's just like I guess you could say a base level employee. Again, that clearly raises ethical issues. It doesn't matter whether it's a Formula One team, a different sports organization, whatever job, because that boss can then use that worker to get what he wants um, by threatening that, that if you don't do this, then this will happen. That's the whole reason, as see George Russell's been interviewed in the pit lane. And yeah, it looks like it hasn't stopped raining, but it is now lightly raining. But the track is going to be in horrible condition, no doubt about it. But yeah, those situations are going to raise all kinds of ethical issues. And if you go look back at the text messages that were, the evidence we saw, I think clearly he abused his position of power in that relationship. That's what it's about. It's got nothing to do with wokeness, which, by the way, no one fucking knows what wokeness actually means. People just throw it around. And at this point, people just say woke for something they disagree with. But that is why he should have been let go. Because, like I said, from the evidence we saw, that from what I remember was not exactly disputed, as the session, by the way, has been delayed again until 1:15. So I'll just hide that timer for a second. But from the evidence we saw, those text messages, they weren't that evidence was not denied. They couldn't find anything to deny its whether it was real or not. So again, based on what I saw, I think he should not be there. And clearly, you know, almost half or pretty much half of the Red Bull team thought the same. But again, luckily for him, he had the favor of the majority owners. If the majority owners had the opinion that the minority ownership had, then he would have been gone months ago. But yeah, I'll put the timer back on screen in a moment. I'm just waiting to tick over to the next minute. But yeah, the session has been delayed till 16:15 local time. So there you go. We've only got really 2 more hours to go until qualifying. Qualifying needs to be held in the next 2 hours. If it's not, then we are done for the day. Looney Classic saying, Chaz, I remember you and I don't know what happens in the background. The guys that chose to keep him clearly see something in him that they don't see in their other employees. My guess is that the reason the Thai ownership kept him is either because he's really good friends with them, or they just have different standards. Of course, they're from a different part of the world compared to us in Europe and the UK, so maybe they've just got different standards for that type of stuff. Which, if that's the case, then it's their company. They can do what they want, but you know, um, I think I wouldn't be surprised if we found out in the future that most of the team wanted him gone, but it was the Thai owners that were keeping him on. Wouldn't be surprised at all if that was the case. Murphy Moses, does this female Collins a relative of the Collins we had in F1 moons ago? No, it's not a relative. It's she's no connection. Looney Classic says, I am a computer engineer and I have worked with managers who slept around at work, but they were so good. Even I would not have fired them. Good leaders are rare, but good computer engineers are plenty. But again, it's like what I said earlier. You can be great at your job. That should not excuse you from being able to commit misconduct at work, no matter how bad or whatever you know you whatever the allegation is. How good you are at your job should not matter. It should not be taken into consideration, because ultimately it doesn't matter when it comes to deciding whether someone should keep the job or not over misconduct. It doesn't matter how good they are, because fair companies treat their employees by the same standards, because you know it, once you treat people with different standards in a way that's unfair, then it's just going to fall apart, isn't it? um Looney Classic says, Chaz of the community has spoken, we are on Horner's side. Some of you are, but I don't think everyone is. But even if the majority of my viewers are, that's not going to change my view. My view is my view, and that is the end of it. I couldn't give a damn if most of you, or even if all of you disagree with me. I don't care. That's my view on what happened. Woden saying, you act like he's a slave owner. You said it, not me. I have not said anything close to that. Ashley Moore says the controlling behaviour she claimed was Horner telling her to stop seeing Jos Verstappen. Again, there is no evidence of that. If you do have evidence of that, post a link in the chat to whatever article or evidence you've seen that shows that. But I have not seen anything about that at all. That is, from as far as I'm concerned, that's total rubbish. Willifon says any employee is Any employee in any organization can be fired if it's needed or the correct decision. And Will says he's not on Horner's side at all. Again, that's as I was saying. You need to treat everyone within an organization fairly, and like you said, you can't have people who are unfireable no matter what they do, because that's how organizations, companies, that's how they come crashing down. If you treat certain bosses like they can't do no wrong, even if they in their personal life commit a crime or again workplace misconduct or whatever, if you never fire them, then it's going to destroy that particular workplace. That's just the way it is. Um, Dartle Rome says, "Don't forget Jos Verstappen is a womanizer as well. There's always two sides in the story." I mean, yeah, Jos has his own problems, which is well documented, and I don't like Jos as a person from what I've heard of, the stories. But in terms of the Christian Horner stuff, he's got nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it. But yeah, I don't like Jos as a person, and the main reason is some of the stories about how he treated Max as a kid. I think was over the line, and also yeah, the him abusing Max's mother again, absolutely not on, obviously, and I would hope that at least the majority of my viewers would agree with that. Um, Looney Classic says you are right, Chaz. You guys in the West complicate things for nothing. Here in South Africa, we date each other all the time. I have gone out with a couple of clients sometimes, and nobody cares. The difference is you're not, from what I can tell, you are not the boss of your whatever business you're working for. So my guess is the power dynamics that you have with those clients is completely different to what it was with Christian Horner. And it's not that we complicate things in our part of in our part of the world. It's just we consider. I think we consider misconduct a lot more than maybe they do in other parts of the world. Okay, obviously, there's different cultures and all of that. I don't want to go to a whole political spiel, but with the way we do things in the West, stuff like what Horner did is, and I don't think should really be tolerated. It's something that did go on a lot in the past, but lots of things went on in the past that thankfully don't go on anymore. So yeah, I think you know, um, yeah, that's just the way I think about the situation. But looking at the track again, it is still raining, but still light. The rain. Um, Dorsal Rim says they made it. I agree with you, Chazza. Nevertheless, they made it that far just being assholes. Um, Crystal Racing says I can't wait for Newey, Wheatley, Vettel, Max, and Horner to release their autobiographies. I would. I think what I would like to read. Obviously, he's quite old now, so I hope he can get it out before he he has any ill health. But Helmut Marko, I'd love to hear what the stories and what he has to say. As Ted Kravitz is interviewing the FIA race director, which is Niels Witch, I think his name is. And yeah, Nib saying Yoss is a piece of shit, and that's not up for debate. Delayed another 15 minutes. Great. Absolutely fan-fucking-tastic. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the timer back to just delayed because it's still hammering down with rain. It is. I not yet, but in the next 15 to 20 minutes, I'm gonna have to make a decision as to whether to continue the stream, for another hour or so, because I I think there's a very good chance we're not going to get qualifying today. The Wona says Alonso will have a good autobiography, especially the part where McLaren gave him different breaks to Lewis. Yeah, Alonso, I'm sure he's got plenty to say as well. I'd love to hear his reflection on 2007. Obviously, if you interviewed him at the time, he probably would have said absolutely vile stuff about the way he was treated. But obviously, went back to McLaren, didn't have a good time, but I think he improved his relations with McLaren at least. Um, Let me just find some other comments. Ashley Moore says, read the claim made to Red Bull. It's quite detailed, and she repeated it to various news channels. The complaints were submitted by Yoss on her behalf. I I don't think they were, and I don't. Again, if you've got evidence of that, just post it in the chat. But I don't remember. I remember Yoss wanting Horner to be sacked, but that was because obviously Yoss has a big he has a lot of influence on Max in terms of his career, and Yoss was saying if if you do not you know make this decision, then we're going to leave. But I'm pretty sure Yoss was not involved in any affair or whatever. Again, send me the evidence. Todd says the bigger concern is the late VSC call today. Clearly, everyone knew McLaren was going to swap cars. At the end, but VSC could have hampered that, so they waited for that to get Lando in the lead. Yeah, as I said earlier, that was a very bad look. And the FIA, they should have called the virtual safety car sooner. I don't care what their excuse is. It was obvious that there was going to be at least a virtual safety car for Hulkenberg's car, so yeah. Yeah, Rivaldo saying Yoss is one of those horrible human beings I've ever heard of. Ashley Moore says she demanded a massive payoff, and Yoss demanded Horner to be sacked. Yeah, Yoss demanded Horner to be sacked, but not because he was involved with the woman. Looney Class is saying, Chazzy, you're right. Women need to be protected. It's a rough world out there. It's not even that, though. It's, forget the whole, sexual misconduct. It's also just blatantly unfair for the employee that is in the much less powerful position if they're in that relationship. Turn the gender roles around. It's still bullshit. If let's say a female was the boss of Red Bull and then started having a relationship with an employee much less powerful than them, who was a male, it would still be an abuse of power. It doesn't matter on the gender role. It doesn't matter. Obviously, there are still what do you call it? There are still stereotypes and stigmas in the world, which obviously doesn't favor women. So obviously that hurt in this case more. But even if you reverse the roles around, it's still bad. And I would still say that if it was a female who was in that position of power, I would still say that they should be let go, because again, it's an abuse of power. But Red Bull, they've made their bed. Now they've got to lay in it, and once they've laid in it for a bit, I think they'll realise they fucked up and they kept the wrong. They made the wrong decision. Yoss will have a meltdown when Max retires from F1. Um, it's 5 minutes or 6 minutes past seven, by the way, here in the UK. Todd was just asking what time is it here in the UK. Yeah, it's just gone past 7 p.m. Um, well, if Max retires in like 15 years from now, then I think you'll still be pretty satisfied, especially if Max comes away with like the most championships ever. If Beyonce was my boss, she could use me all she wants. I'd give up my salary to be with her. Well, that's your decision, isn't it? That's your decision. If you want that, then have it. Um, Hulkenberg was out of the car and walking around. They still didn't have the VSC out since the Woden. Yeah, it was so obvious. It was like I've seen this though with the stewards as well, where there'll be a first lap crash and then they'll put a yellow flag out and then they'll keep it out until the cars get back round to that part of the track, and then they'll put a safety car out. It's like, we knew it was going to be a safety car. Why did you wait 2 extra minutes? Like, what's the point? It's just so stupid. If you know it's going to be a safety car, just put the safety car out. Don't wait. Darth Rome says Yoss is a person. As a person, is a complete 100% dickhead, but as a driver, the Verstappen are pure racers and are very fast. Yoss is winning in rally cars at the moment, showing that he can drive. Yeah, Yoss, he was a fantastic driver, but as a person, absolutely horrible. I hope Max, and I don't think Max will. I think we've already seen evidence that Max is nowhere near as bad as his dad. Thankfully. But yeah, it is just absolutely pissing down. And yeah, in 2 hours from now is sunset in Sao Paulo. So yeah, like I said, I'm gonna make a decision probably in the next 20 minutes or so as to whether I'm gonna keep streaming, because even if they get qualifying underway, I do not want to be waiting another hour or two, because you know it's I don't want to take up my entire day waiting and waiting and waiting. But obviously, this is the issue with scheduling the sessions later in the day, which Liberty Media and the FIA do with F1. Qualifying in Brazil used to start at, what was it? It would be 4 p.m. UK time, which would be 1 p.m. local time. But instead, today was scheduled to start 3 p.m. local time. Not sure if it would have made a difference, but it helps in terms of not having to worry about sunset and all. But yeah, looking at the radar, I don't see how we're going to get a qualifying session here. Let me know, guys, in the chat. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think we're going to have qualifying? Because looking at the radar, the heavier rain is coming, so we're probably not going to get a session here. And if that is the case, and looking at the live broadcast of Ted Kravitz in the pit lane, it is still pissing down. Stuff like this is why F1 likes holding races in the Middle East. I mean, that's why we all like that, because it's not a concern, obviously. Yeah, it's still raining really heavily in the pit lane. And as Rook says, if quali doesn't take place today or in the morning due to the rain, then they will use the positions from practice 1, meaning that Oliver Behrman would start 3rd on the grid. The thing is, though, is tomorrow the weather is expected to be like this, but all day. So we might not even get a race tomorrow. We could literally have Spa 2021 all over again. Because tomorrow's weather is even worse than today. But, yeah. Vince says, it's up to you, boss. I have to go. Thanks for trying your efforts. Do not go unnoticed. Cheers, mate. Let me go back to that weather radar. Yeah, I'm just trying to think, what to do, because looking at the radar, I don't see. This is the issue: is I don't see us getting going again. But what if magically they get out there and they start qualifying? And the thing is, again, as I said a moment ago, and this is I think if qualifying does get cancelled today, the more interesting story is, will we get qualifying or the race tomorrow? Because again, the rain tomorrow is just as bad, if not worse. So quali will probably commence at 10 a.m. local time tomorrow. Maybe, but I mean, it still looks like heavy rain around that time tomorrow in Sao Paulo. So that's what I mean. This could be it. This literally could be it. This could be, the sprint race. That could be the last bit of action of the weekend. Because I don't see, if they're not going to go out at all today, and the rain is as bad tomorrow, which it looks like it probably is, then we could have no more running this weekend. That is a legit possibility. Maybe use sprint qualifying positions for the full race start. Maybe, but again, whether you actually get this, maybe whether a race even happens is a different story altogether. But yeah, looking at the weather, I think I I think what I'm gonna do, guys, I think I'm gonna end the stream because, like I said, sunsets in 2 hours. Really, they need to get underway now to properly get qualifying in. Because the thing is even if they could start qualifying now, you're going to have red flags probably during the session. So the session's probably going to end up being 20, maybe even 30 minutes longer than it usually is. So qualifying, even if it started now, wouldn't finish probably until half an hour before sunset. So even if qualifying does start, as what is race, there's a message on the screen. Yeah, qualifying delayed again. Even if qualifying started now, we would only just probably get it finished before sunset. So I'm going to end the stream. Sorry, guys, but literally, Mother Nature has said no. Qualifying will not happen today. Will it happen tomorrow? We'll have to see. Maybe they'll magically get qualifying in today. I don't think they will. Let's see what happens tomorrow. So this is what I'm going to do. Obviously, if qualifying doesn't happen today, and they're going to announce probably in the next hour or so if it doesn't happen today. What do you call it? Once they announce qualifying and what time it's going to start tomorrow, I will set up the qualifying watch along and schedule the start time and all of that. And we'll go live and we'll see what happens. And we'll see whether we get qualifying in or even the race. And if we get, if it ends up being a day where we have both qualifying and the race in the same day, so fucking be it. We'll go for it. But I don't see qualifying happening today. It's too wet. It's absolutely pissing down. If they're not going out now, then they're not going out at all, as far as I can see. So, yeah. Cheers for coming along, guys. Sorry that we had to talk about, fucking politics and misconduct and that for a bit, but, sometimes we do get talking for a bit about certain subjects, but there you go. But yeah, thanks for coming along for this stream. Do pay attention to the community tab on my YouTube homepage and also the Discord server, because when it's announced, if qualifying does take place tomorrow, when that is announced, and in terms of the start time, I will then announce what my plan is. So do, again, pay attention to the community tab on my homepage and the Discord server for those announcements. But yeah, cheers for you guys coming along. Obviously, I'll end the poll in the chat. Where I asked you guys who did you think was going to take pole, and 37% of you said Lando Norris, which I agree. I think if we do get any running, I think Lando Norris will get on pole. But yeah, make sure to subscribe to the channel, guys. Hit the like button before you go. Don't forget to join the Discord server as well if you haven't already. Again, if you join that server, you'll be able to find out what I'm going to be doing for tomorrow in terms of, content for this delayed and disrupted Sao Paulo Grand Prix weekend. So, yeah, try and keep up to date if you can, and I'll try and keep you as bang up to date as I can with what I am going to be doing with this, disrupted race weekend. But yeah, thank you guys for coming along for this qualified watch along. This stream, by the way, I'm going to end up. Am I going to delete it? I think what I'll do is I'll probably rename this stream. I'll probably just rename it something and leave it up. But yeah, I'll let you guys know when I'll be live again for the qualifying watch along tomorrow, when I think we'll get qualifying, and we'll see what happens and whether we actually get qualifying and a race tomorrow. But guys, thanks for coming along today, and it has been me, Chazza HD. Goodbye.